Evolutionary.org podcast coming your way, episode 572. Today, we're going to be reading as many comments as we can possibly get to and responding to them. So, this is going to be part one episode. Part two will be 573. So, you can check that out as well. But this is going to be really fun. We like to do this every couple years just to let you guys know that, hey, we are reading your comments. We do care about you guys. We are listening. So you can definitely find us on all the platforms out there and make comments, and we will read them. So let's just jump right into it, Mobster. Let's not waste any time. So the first one, it's DKHF6Zen. He says, such an awesome video. He's talking about the Deca video we did. He's like, I'm on a Deca cycle now. You guys just saved my ass. So for me, this one is a situation where we do a video. We're spreading knowledge. You're running the Deca. We're doing a video on Deca. And basically, you're noticing a lot of the things we're saying in the video. You're able to kind of adjust your cycle, and you're able to get more out of your cycle that way. So that's really the whole reason we do this podcast, Monsters, to help people better their cycles. So really glad that things are going well for you, brother. Another one, he says, very informative. Good job. That's by Better Place to Be. There's another one. He says, great podcast, ready. He's like, EQ profiles, since I heard you guys mentioning it a lot. That's by Slight Gains Z, 6970. So look, we've covered equipoise on several different videos. So if you guys really dig on the pod, we've done so many podcasts. Mobster and I have done so many podcasts. I've done so many podcasts before Mobster came aboard. So we've talked about EQ many, many different times. So if there's a steroid you want to do, you could simply Google evolutionary.org and then put in EQ, or evolutionary.org, put on equipoise, and the video will probably pop up. Or you can do it through the social media platforms. Come on the forum, you can search that way as well. So here's one, Mobster. Here's a question. Joe Cisis 5108. He posed the question. He says, hello, love your podcast. I'm wondering if I use Deca 500 milligrams per week, how many weeks will it stay in my system after the last injection? I'm asking because I'm planning on using ACG for like a month after the last injection and then start PCT. Does that sound good? So, Mobster, you want to answer that question for him?
Yeah. The short answer is no. In terms of what he's thinking, because again, quite rightly, and bearing in mind some of the earlier comments, we put out the information. And here's my thought process, right? Because we love doing the podcast. I've done hundreds with Steve, and Steve's probably up in the thousands. So I would sometimes say the information's out there, guys, not just for us, but from everywhere. So I kind of wonder sometimes why guys, and maybe it's just because they're new and they're coming in. And again, that's why we're providing the information and education. So you go, okay, you're going to do Deca or EQ or whatever at 500 milligrams, fine. Is it ideal for what you're doing? That's something you need to tell us, and we can't do that in a very simple question and answer that you've just given. So there's that. Then in terms of how long is it in your system? Well, I always keep that very, very simple. So it comes down to the half-life. And in fact, Steve's given a calculation on some of the other podcasts where he talks about the half-life and then how long before it's not visible in your system if it was in a test, which can be a very long time in terms of the test and so on and so forth. But it's more to do with the effects on your body. And then I would probably get to that last part there, Steve, because that's, to me, HCG is something that you and I have talked about quite a lot. Not something that we're over keen on, where it comes from, and then there are podcasts on that specifically. And then finally, HCG and then a PCT doesn't make sense to me. Do it properly. So I think I would prefer them to other podcasts, Steve, or actually get them to come on the forums, because we've got some great answers, and specifically the PCT there. Back to you.
Another one, again, this is still on the Deca podcast. He says Proviron, because I mentioned Proviron in this one to use it with nandrolone. He says Proviron, Masteron. Yes, it is. So you got to remember with these steroids, the brand name is Proviron, but the actual steroid itself is Masteron. So when you see it being sold, your gym buddies selling it, or you see it on one of our sponsored, one of our approved sources, they're selling it. It's going to be listed under Proviron, but really the steroid is Masteron. So that's basically how you know the difference. But look, everyone knows Proviron as Proviron. No one goes around calling Proviron Masteron. You see what I'm saying? So that is a really, really good question. Thanks for asking that. Hank the Ripper asked that one. Here's another one, Mobster, for you. He says, I love Deca, very low dosage with my testosterone. How about you? Do you agree with that or disagree?
Yes. I love Deca, and I've said as much on many of the podcasts. And of course, Sustanon is a combination of testosterones. So the short answer that would be yes. But of course, other listeners, other users, and people commenting might disagree. We all have things that we like.
So what specific? So the next comment, Tommy C. Givern. It was Tony Kerr who originally asked that. Then Tommy C. Givern responded, "What do you consider low?" So what do you consider low, Mobster, when it comes to Deca? What's low and what's too low with Deca? Really quick.
I can only tell you what I've done and what worked really well. And a combination of the Sustanon and Deca together was less than 700 milligrams a week. So you're talking about 300 to 350 milligrams of each. That seems to work very well for me. That's low in the modern sense. It used to be a lot less in the past, Steve.
Last one on this one, DL Vox 52222 asks, why would you take anything that creates ED issues? And I see that a lot. So some of the guys on the forums do that too. Mobster, I know you have a strong opinion on this one.
Right. So, why do you take steroids? Some steroids called baldness. One of the Psalms can give you bad night sight. Other ones going to affect your libido and so on and so forth. But
I think what he's getting at is Deca itself. Oh, it causes ED issues.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen with me. So go ahead.
No, let me answer that on that then. My personal experience is when I last took Deca, which would be before I moved to Wales, I had the same libido, the same erection quality, whatever you want to get into, as off. So it made no difference to me. I think it's very much user specific. And the obvious answer is if you have that issue, there are other forms of testosterone you could use.
Yeah, and for me, like, I not have issues. I think a lot of the whole Deca thing, a lot of that is psychological, because maybe one guy had the problem, then another guy had a problem. They started saying, it's amazing how these things in the 80s
What about this, Steve? I'll just jump back in for a second. I might be massively fat. You might be massively lean. I might be incredibly old. You might be incredibly young. The variance is going to be there, in the same reason why doctors would switch medications around that are not working for us to another medication that does work, because we're not the fucking same. The only thing you and I are the same of is we're the same species and we're the same sex. I'm taller, you're shorter. So the person asking a question would need to be more specific than that. And that's how you do it if you was a doctor. It's the same when it comes to PEDs. That's the reason why we ask for that kind of information if we're giving proper, solid advice.
Yeah, exactly.
So one more thing, Steve. Sorry, and this is something you and I have covered on this podcast. So when we talk about dosages and stacks and whatever else, one of the things you and I, especially recently, have started to say is that when we're giving out this information and we talk about those things, we are generalizing. We're saying what will work for 90% based on the feedback from 100%. So if we have 100,000 users of performance-enhancing drugs, 90% are going to get the gains or the response or the side effects that you and I talk about. It's the 10% that don't, but we're really talking to the 90%. The majority of people are going to grow, the majority of people are going to lose weight and so on. That's how we can do it. If we want to be more specific, then we need them to come on the forums and give them individual advice.
So the next comment we want to discuss is from the T-Bowl video. And in this one, I'll bring you on this one, Mobster. It's me _Philippines says it was busted in Germany for the Olympics, not Russia. In the podcast, we talked about how it was the East German team and it was the Russians, yada, yada. So, Mobster, why don't you clear that up? I don't think people understand.
This is an easy one, Steve.
Go ahead. Can you explain this to this guy?
So let's communism being Russian is rubbish right there. First off, communism isn't Russian specific. There's communism in China, for example. So East Germany versus West Germany. East Germany was the bit that was retained by the Russians at the end of the Second World War. West Germany and the rest of the planet was not. I mean, I'm oversimplifying political, geological, or geographical boundaries, but the long and the short of it was you had a Russian-backed country vis-a-vis East Germany that was producing, I mean, you've mentioned this on the podcast, Steve, a Stasi, which is the state or secret police, I can't remember which it is, a Stasi reference number for the product that became Turinabol, T-Bol. And this was produced specifically so that the Eastern, i.e. the communist-backed athletes would kick American and or European first world arse. And it's as simple as that. If the guy wants to argue semantics and politics, he's welcome to. The reality is T-Bol is an amazing drug that's highly regarded by gurus, including me and you when we do this podcast. It doesn't really matter how it came into being because most drugs, apart from T-Bol, came into being to treat medical conditions. And we're not using them for those reasons. We're using them for big muscles and strong muscles and lean muscles and so on and so forth. So it's nice to know the history and it's nice to have these kind of debates, but it's not really relevant. But I do like the fact that he's in there commenting, so come back at us again by all means.
Next one, Elite Pickle 209 says stack Masteron. This was on a Masteron podcast we did. It says stack Masteron for the AI benefits. If you get gyno on Tren, it could help stop it. So you are right. Masteron is great as an anti-estrogen, but the thing is with Tren, it doesn't cause aromatization of estrogen on Tren. So that would not actually help you on Tren, but it does stack really well with Tren. So I really like Masteron with Tren for those of you who are looking to recomp or looking to cut down or something or harden up. It really makes a good stack with it.
On that one, Steve. Sorry, on that one. Yeah. So there's a lot of guys that don't like to use an AI at all on cycle until they have issues. And I'm not keen personally on the idea of using another steroid, a hardening steroid, in this case, a Masteron, as an AI. We understand the mechanics and the chemistry, etc. But guys, I would much prefer, and I've said this a million times, to use an AI from day one. It wouldn't be Masteron. And I don't want to wait until I have got problems and then we can argue again the semantics when you're worried about your bitch tits. So I'd much rather be in an insurance policy, call it what you will. I'd rather play safe, low dosages and using a legitimate AI over Masteron. But that's just me personally. Back to you, Steve.
So this is a good comment here about outer spacing. Mobster, I want you to respond to it. I'll respond to it though as well. It says, I've tried Tren once, not great results and bad mental sides. I don't think I took enough. I'm going to try it just one more time. This time I'll use Tren Hex. We'll see. So let me comment on that, Mobster. I'll let you comment. This was on a trenbolone. So, and listen, at the end of the day, I run plenty of cycles. I've had bad cycles. I've had good cycles. A lot of my bad cycles, I just didn't have my head in the game. I was dealing with stuff with work. I was dealing with stuff with relationships. I was dealing with moves. I was dealing with all kinds of things that kind of interfere with my cycle. So don't just say, you know what, I ran Tren once. I didn't really like it. Let me just forget it, or any other steroid. You've got to try them at least a couple times just to get a feel for them. And look, at the end of the day, some steroids you're not going to like, and some steroids you're going to like. Some steroids you might like at 25 or 35, but you won't like them at 45. Like today, I would never run Dianabol. It just doesn't fit for because I'm a very active guy. Yesterday, I just went to the beach and literally walked an hour along the coast through the sand and did some running and stuff and did some swimming. It just doesn't fit my lifestyle to walk around bloated, from the D-ball. But when I first got into using anabolic steroids in my late 20s, because I was a skinnier guy, D-ball was great for me because I was able to bulk a lot on it, and I really, really liked that. So don't give up on a steroid, and also change up your brand, change up your source. Maybe you just don't react well to that particular brand. Mobster, what's your comment on that?
I've got two, right? One is, and I'll touch on something you've just said, as we change. Am I as skinny, lean, hard? Is my cardiovascular ability as good as it was when I was younger? No. When I first started taking PEDs at age 37, I'm different now than I was then. Therefore, the way that a drug is going to work on my body is going to be different. But something stood out for me in the actual listener's comment. He said, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, he had bad sides, including mental issues on low dose, but wants to take more, Steve. So therefore, my first thought is, why would you want to take more of a drug that you didn't get as much benefit from in terms of muscular gains or strength, that's actually probably going to give you even more mental issues, more stress, more anxiety, because you want to up the dose. And that is assuming that all the other parameters are exactly the same age, body fat, cardiovascular, yada, yada, yada. No, I would suggest that's a bad idea. It might also be ester related, Steve. You might have used it as a short acting ester. You might have, as you said already, have a bunch of other things going on at the same time. I would not want him to have a stressful job or stress in a relationship or whatever else, especially if he's going to up the dose on a product, a Tren that gave him mental issues. To me, that's like you're asking for more mental issues because you want to take more Tren. There are other options. There are other PEDs. Choose something else. There are, just off the top of my head, Steve, 20 in the forms of esters and steroids and whatever else you can take, and hundreds, of course, originally steroids. So there are other options, different ways of doing things, a different stack, a different approach. And of course, we can make sure that the rest of his life is all set. So that's the kind of advice that we give him. Again, if he came on the forums, are you stressed? You need to change your job, do that. Then run the Tren. Then try it. And it might even be 50 milligrams a week more or 100 milligrams a week more. And his diet might have been poor. So there's a million different factors. But right off the top of my head, the idea that you want to take more of a drug that gave you issues, no, it doesn't make sense to me. But like I said, there might be other factors at play.
So next one, the Superdrol podcast got pretty popular. And there were 3 comments that I cherry picked that I really wanted to read. The first one was, I remember this steroid, a lot of companies had it labeled as a pro hormone. This is from Treep95. And so Superdrol in America, I don't know how it was in Britain, maybe Mobster, you can comment, but in America 15-20 years ago, you could buy Superdrol as a designer steroid. So it wasn't a pro hormone exactly, but it was a designer steroid. You could buy it with a credit card online, and it was, they called it different things. One of the names was Beastrol, was one of the names for it. So literally you could go online for like 40-50 bucks and buy a bottle of a Superdrol clone called Beastrol or called something else. That's crazy, huh? So you could be an 18-year-old kid with a credit card and go on there and buy it. That's nuts. So you could see why they finally closed that loophole, because it was causing a lot of problems with people. I can remember some kids were posting, like 18, 19-year-old kids were posting, they were using these designer steroids and they had yellow eyes because they were getting jaundice. So very, very dangerous that they allowed it to be acquired so easily at the time. Another one is from Keith Lilly 6242, and Mobster, you might want to comment on this one. I'll let you take a crack at this one. He says, if you run Superdrol for only 3 to 4 weeks, it makes it tough to break major plateaus. And he's talking about plateaus when it comes to strength. Because once you start, you have to come off, or most people do. It's not the best drug because on for 2 weeks, it starts kicking in, and week 4, you're ready to come off. So not an ideal, he says, not an ideal addition to a cycle for me. Feeling like shit actually makes me weaker and I don't sleep. Not worth a couple of weeks of being strong. I think there's a couple good points on that one. Marshall, why don't you comment on that one?
Yeah, I mean, let me start with the stuff that you've already mentioned, Steve. Most of the pro hormones wasn't pro hormones. They were steroids. And as I just mentioned earlier, there are hundreds of steroids. I think it's 120 something steroids. And most of those didn't make it because they were weak or they had too many side effects and whatever else. And other steroids, the ones that did get to market, did the job. So the whole pro hormone, especially Superdrol, was a steroid under a different name. And until the government caught on, that's the reason they could be legally sold, as you say, to an 18-year-old with a credit card. So I would say the same thing again. If it's as much of an issue as he says it is, why is he still using it? Why is he using that when he could use something else? I would actually, part of the problem, I think the problem with the Superdrol, Steve, is people still don't treat it as an actual steroid. They still think somehow it's safer. In his own comments, says that that's not the case. Literally, he gets great, he gets strong. 2 weeks, he feels fine. The numbers are going up in the gym. He's hitting PRs, but 4 weeks in, he feels like shit and he has to come off. Don't use it then. There are other things you can do. I get it. Sometimes we fixate on a certain steroid that we want to try or that we had great success with before. And I'm probably as guilty of this. I suspect Steve has been, and he talked about Debo just now. You change things because sometimes you have to change things. You don't need to use Superdrol if it's as bad as you say. In the circumstances that he's given, Steve, I'd use Anavar. Milder, less side effects, arguably, with the possible exception of the pumps, which you can take taurine for. Great for my personal strength, etc., etc. So why would I choose a Superdrol when I can take Anavar and I'm going to have less issues? Again, it's that sort of situation, guys. I understand why you're saying that you've had success with it in terms of your strength, but it's so bloody horrible after 4 weeks that you have to come off. Then don't use it. Use something else. That's the again. We have these podcasts and we give you other options. We even do it sometimes on the Trend type podcast, Steve, when we give alternates and we say, lower the dose, change how you use it, time on, time off, multiple cycles through the year that are short, and so on and so forth. So you don't have to stay on and have horrible side effects if it's that bad of a drug, a national personal experience. So why do something that's going to fuck you up? No, there's no need to. There are other choices and there are other options, and we try to give you those in the podcast.
So one more is kind of a hater comment, and I'll comment on it, let Mobster comment on it. He says, don't run Superdrol alone. Fucking ridiculous. Run 200 to 400 milligrams of test with it. You'll thank me later, so will your old lady. So this is another bro science that we hear a lot. I deal with this with my clients a lot who come to me. They always think I need a testosterone base with everything. So Superdrol is one of those that I always recommend running it by itself. All right. Or you can use it, as a light kickstart, very light. But if you're going to run a full dose of 30 milligrams or 40 milligrams of Superdrol, you do not want to stack another steroid with it. The side effects are going to be absolutely atrocious. And look, I just mentioned about the jaundice issue. You will get liver failure if you start stacking other steroids with Superdrol. It's that toxic. If you stack testosterone with it at 400 milligrams, like this guy suggests, you're in for a rude awakening, because not only are you going to get more androgenic side effects, which are going to cause your blood pressure and everything to skyrocket, but you're also going to get estrogenic side effects, which is also going to cause your blood pressure to skyrocket. So you're getting a ton of blood pressure problems on the Super Bowl by itself, okay, more than any other steroid, and hitting you like a ton of bricks, and you're going to run testosterone on top of it, which is going to give you even more androgenic side effects, and then you're going to run it and get estrogenic side effects on top of it. It doesn't make sense, bro. So I'm saying run Superdrol solo. This way you don't get massive side effects and you don't end up give yourself a stroke. So this is a misconception guys don't understand. You will get shut down with or without using testosterone, okay? It doesn't matter. You're getting tons of hormones from the Superdrol going into your system. You're getting tons of male hormones going tons in your system. You don't need testosterone with it. You don't want testosterone with it. So I disagree with Brian more. Look, at the end of the day, you don't want to listen, go ahead and run 400 milligrams of test with Superdrol. Come back to me, and then you can start complaining. Oh, I have liver damage. Oh, I have kidney damage. Oh, I have high blood pressure. Oh, I can't sleep at night. You're going to come back and start bitching about your side effects, and you're going to regret it. Mobster, do you want to
Steve, yeah. I've stood at my local gym, and I love the fellas down there, and I love my local gym as well as my own gym here. But some of the conversations that the guys are having is based on personal experience. Some of it's based on what they've had a conversation with their mate. It's a bit like discussing football or hockey or sex or whatever, especially when you're drunk. It's that kind of, it made sense at the time, but when you look back on it in the morning, Steve, you think, what the fuck was I talking about? Why did they have that conversation? So how many times have you and I heard you got to have a testosterone base? That stuff's been doing around since before I was born, never mind since when I started taking PEDs 15, 20 years ago, whatever it is now. I've never needed to run. I would say, I can think of different cycles that I've run, and I've run a bunch of products where I didn't have quote unquote a testosterone base, and I've been successful in the particular choices that I've made for my competitions and the records and stuff that I've got. And so it's rubbish basically, and it's one of those kind of logic fails. You're already, as you say, Steve, using a harsh in terms of side effects drug. Why do I would then want to add something else that's going to stress my body on top? I again don't need the Superdrol. I'd rather run the testosterone on its own. As a great example, Steve, and I've used this analogy a bunch of times, and this is more personal experience than anything else. How many times have you and I said or heard me say, I don't get on with testosterone in Amphate, and yet my buddies absolutely loved it. So the logic would say, oh, they think it's great, they're having success, therefore I should. Nope. Never did. Never felt great on it. Never felt one way or the other. Didn't make any effect to me, and it felt like a weak form of testosterone for me in terms of the effects and my strength and whatever else. And yet, logic would suggest that that was wrong. So it's a science what we need to deal with, not the logic. In this particular example, what we think versus what we know and what's been proven, and therefore the argument here is it kind of makes sense, but in reality, it doesn't work out the way people think it does. So you do not need, some do, but it is not a rule, it is not a law that you must have a testosterone base or some form of testosterone with something else. And of course, logic foul, all bloody steroids, especially anabolic ones, are forms of testosterone. So you're only asking about which kind of form of testosterone. Really, that includes the Superdrol being used with a form of testosterone. It is a steroid. It is a form of testosterone. It's just to get, we're starting to be pedantic. Listen, results matter. Side effects matter. Did you get lean? Did you get strong? Did you have next to no side effects? Great. You've had an amazing cycle. That's what matters. The rest is just personal experience, what we heard from a buddy, and not really science. And even the science is based on medical stuff, very rarely based on performance enhancing juices and the dosages that we use. So again, stuff that we would talk, again, cycles we did 20, 30 years ago in the 60s and 70s, 40 years ago, Steve, 60 years ago, hell, versus what we do now have changed. Some of that science, including pyramiding, is completely negated. We don't do some of those things. So the idea that we're still talking about something from 30 years ago that wasn't logical then, and saying it's logical now doesn't make any sense to me. So back to you on that one.
Okay, so there's another video. This is on the mint video, and we had some comments on that one, a bunch of comments on mint. Turbo D, he actually edited this comment, so I don't know what his original comment was, but it was something talking about how I had said that nandrolones show up as testosterone on blood work. So I'm not really sure why he's mentioning it in the mint video, but he really makes a snarky comment on that. He puts like crying emojis and says, "What the fuck?" So actually, Joshua Kevin Perry responds to him. So this is a situation where you guys out there are doing our work for us, Mobster.
I like this. I love it.
And this guy comes back and he corrects him. He says, no, he says regular Roche /ELIA testosterone blood work shows nandrolone as testosterone, whereas the sensitive doesn't. So he basically answers the question right there. So if you come on the forum, I have a blood work thread, and I actually explain why that happens. Also, in some blood work, trenbolone will show up as estriol, as estrogen. So a lot of people that run Tren, and they'll run tests with it, and then they'll see the estrogen numbers like sky high, and they're like, what's going on? I'm running an AI. It shouldn't be this way. Well, it's because trenbolone can show up as estrogen in certain blood work. So again, you come on the forum, you check out my blood work thread. I will lay out which blood works to get, which blood works not to get. So if you go to your doctor and you get blood work, you get the regular blood work, there's a good chance if you're running any type of nandrolone and some the testosterone derivative steroids, that it will show up as testosterone in the blood work. So that's how it is. So you have to make sure you get the right blood work. So at the end of the day, this is an example of someone, he's trying to make a smart ass comment, and he basically looks like a fool on that. So
let
that's
me answer
something
this as well, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
Let me answer this as well, right? So you're not having a drug test that's testing you for specific steroids. You're having a blood test, and your doctor, unless he's some sort of steroid doctor, is not really looking to see what kind of steroids you're using when he gives you a blood test, right? So and most of the doctors that are doing this are not endocrinologists, again, who might be familiar with the fact that you're an athlete, quote unquote, and or using performance enhancing drugs. So what are they looking for, Steve? They're looking for health markers. You've asked for a blood test to, for example, to see how much bound and free testosterone you've got. You're looking for blood lipids and so on and so forth. So now we're going to debate the idea of how something might show up. Yes, we would, and again, you've just covered it already, Steve, that there might be certain particular markers that are confused. But we would, again, Steve would ask you on the forum, what was your cycle? Can I see the results of your blood tests and so on? Steve has great knowledge on this, but way above mine in this particular example. I know what the markers are for bound and free and health markers and what's you should, for example, avoiding creatine before a test and dieting and fasting and all those kind of things. Coming off drugs actually is a good idea. But the idea that we can debate the semantics of what shows up and what doesn't show up is not really important, isn't it, Steve? It's just whether you're getting great results or not. And if it was a drug test that was going to test you for the fact you were using steroids, then it'd be an issue. It might be an issue in terms of lipids and profiles and stuff, but Steve's got you covered. He would ask those questions. This is the reason why that's a false value, because you're taking this and it's come up in the wrong way. However, he would then look at the rest of the blood tests and say, hang on, so we know that it converts to this. It knows it might show that as your blood test. And therefore, actually, overall, it's a good blood test or it's a bad blood test. And then again, we could fix that. So that's really the issue. That's what we want the blood tests for. They're healthy, isn't it, Steve? It's to see how much testosterone is in your body. Is a steroid stack good? Or are you ill and unwell? That's pretty much it. The rest is semantics. The rest is just arguing how something's going to show up in a blood test. All I want to know, Steve, is my stack good? And am I healthy? That's pretty much the bottom fucking line every single time. Like I said, most MDs won't have a clue. Not all endocrinologists are going to be performance enhancing drug educated. And again, it's us looking at blood tests, asking about your stack, and then we would recognize that comes up. Again, we're not going to go into the specifics of a person's individual response on a podcast. That's impossible. We literally have to have on a Q&A with that particular person what they're doing, what their body fat, and that's very individual. And then again, is it important to the outcome of the blood test? No, not really. So it's semantics. I like the debate. I like the fact that there was a comeback from another customer. We like those kind of feedbacks. I don't even mind the fact it was snarky, Steve, because if nothing else, we can have this conversation right now that we're having. Back to you.
So one more really quick I wanted to throw in here. This was one about also on the men episode. There's a couple of comments here. It says, you guys have a good channel. Feel like you should have way more views, but thanks for putting out the content for us. So guys, one of the reasons, we're on so many different platforms, so it's kind of spread out. So we'll have this many views on this platform, this many views. But obviously, the most of our views are going to be right on the evolutionary.org website where you can listen to the podcast. So you don't have to listen to us through one of these social media sites. You can just literally come to the forum and listen to the podcast. So that's where we get the bulk of the views. So if we get like 5,000 views on YouTube, for example, that doesn't mean that that's all our views. So we're not like primarily on YouTube. So a lot of you who just use YouTube or just use Apple or just use whatever, we're not just on there. So if we're getting thousands of views there, we're getting like more like tens of thousands of views on the Evo website itself. So that kind of answers that one. And then the last one, this ties into what we talked about earlier. He says, actually, the 7-A methyl estrogen is much stronger than regular estriadol, but doesn't keep the body healthy, so test is required. It's similar to D-bol, but more androgenic and injectable. So this one, look, at the end of the day, this is a kind of a weird comment because you're saying if I run testosterone with men, it's going to make my body healthier. And if you run blood work and you run your lipids and you get your blood pressure checked, your cholesterol checked, you'll find out pretty quick that you're wrong on that, because there's no way that you can add testosterone to any cycle and actually have your blood pressure improve or have your cholesterol improve. More gear added to a cycle does not make a cycle more healthy. So this in itself is bro science. That was sent in by Michael Voden-Leek. So look, at the end of the day, again, it's bro science. Mobster and I touched on it earlier, but you can't keep saying if I run testosterone with this steroid or run testosterone with that steroid, it's going to make the cycle more healthy, because that's just not how this works. The more gear you run, the more side effects you're going to get. Now, the exception would be in Proviron's case, because you can run Proviron with a nandrolone, and the Proviron will offset the hormones. And so where you could run aromacin, which is not an anabolic steroid, it's a drug, you can run aromacin in a cycle and help disable the estrogen enzyme. So in those particular situations like that, you could run something, a drug or a compound or a hormone or something, and that could offset some side effects. But to think that you could add testosterone to a cycle and reduce estrogen side effects and reduce androgenic side effects, that doesn't make any sense.
No. I'll touch on this one, Steve, again, right? So I will have been guilty myself when I was a lot younger and when the internet first started of saying what was off the top of my head based on my experience and my knowledge at the time. Here's what I do now. And I've actually said I do this specifically if I'm going to try a new steroid myself. I should know by now pretty much the schoolboy level of most anabolic steroids that we'd use in performance enhancing drugs. And then I've got specific personal experience and some more knowledge on one or two over others. But what do? If I'm going to try something new, I go and look at it. I've even listened to our own podcast because I've sat down and researched that podcast. It doesn't mean I retain the bloody information, Steve. I do retain a lot, but not everything. So I go back and refresh my memory. I'll go back and look stuff up. I'll go back and check the science. I'll go back and not just check the science or the piece of information on one page or one forum or one thread. I do it on multiple so that I get a good broad consensus of what's true, what's not true, and so on and so forth. It's very easy in these circumstances, and I'm going to use Tren as a great example, Steve, to come on a forum and say something, and how many times have we seen this, including on the UK forums, up the trend, up the trend, up the trend. And there are people that absolutely love it and think it's the best drug ever, and how they feel like gods when they're on it. It's the golden nectar when you're looking at the bottle, and the results of it don't compare to anything else. But of course, we know that the side effects can be horrendous. The anxiety issues for some people is crazy, and so on and so forth. So it's very easy sometimes to say, well, I think this is what would happen, and say that, and then be wrong. And that's fine. I don't mind being wrong, because how we learn is by making mistakes and being wrong and being corrected. Hell, Steve's done that a couple of times on the podcast, and I've had to go back and say, hang on, Steve's correct. He's got more knowledge on that subject. That's fine. And again, that's the reason why we do this podcast, Steve. That's the reason why we put that stuff out. As you say, I can maybe kind of see where he's coming from, but the reality is he's adding yet more of a stressor. And anabolic steroids, there's no argument. We're not using them for medical reasons. And at medical dosages, we're using something that's trying to make us grow muscle and get strong in a very short period of time, even if it's only 8, 12 weeks, whatever, relative to what the normal situation was without steroids. And therefore, it's a kind of stress on the body. So adding something that's going to cause more stress, there needs to be logic. So, for example, it might mean you could do that, but you need to lower the dosages of both, and so on and so forth. So you start to get into that. And again, that would be, again, for the average person who's this weight and this height and this age and this sex and so on. You need a bit more than just saying, if I had a test, it's going to be better, because that doesn't make sense. It might be that you balanced it with something else in the past and it did work, or it was a different performance enhanced drug with tests and so on. So there are so many parameters at play there that I'd question it. And number one, and this would be good, Steve, prove it. Say what you said and prove it. And then maybe we can learn something from you if you're correct. But in this set of circumstances, I don't think so. But I'm glad that they made the comment, because we go off and we get educated and we double check. And then they go away and they've learned something. So that's exactly the reason why we do this podcast again, Steve. Any more? And then we can, or shall we crack on?
Yeah, so the next episode, we're going to do more. So check out the next episode that we do. And that's going to be episode number 573. So if you like these, check out 573 next.
Thank you very much, guys. Give us more feedback and more comments. We love this stuff. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It's our show and based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.